Good morning, everybody. I'm Robert Theobald, Small Business Ombudsman and Vice President of Small Business Services here at the Arizona Commerce Authority. And I'll be your host today for this Tuesday, September 12th, Small Business Boot Camp. We are excited to have you with us. And if you're new to the boot camp, we like to start by thanking our community partners. We cannot do these webinars without our community partners, their time, their effort, and their expertise. And this is just a sample of the more than 120 community partners with over 200 different presenters that we had as part of the boot camp over the last 3 years. So if you're wondering what is the Small Business Boot Camp, it is a webinar series designed to help small businesses prepare, plan, and grow. It is not just the webinars we do every Tuesday morning, but it is workshops that we do, both some hands-on in person, as well as some virtual workshops. And then it is also our content library where we house all of our recordings. So with that, we record all of our boot camp sessions. And we place those recordings in the content library, and there's no cost to access the content library. You can find it at the bottom of the boot camp webpage, where you most likely went to register for today's session. And in there, you can find all of our recorded sessions, and you can sort by those 7 different categories to help narrow it down. But we have a lot of great information in there to help support you as you prepare, plan, and grow your business. If you can't find something and you think we may have covered it, feel free to reach out to us and I can help identify where and get you the link for a session that will relate to what you need. Also, the ACA has a number of other programs that help support small businesses throughout the state. We have our Career Readiness Credential Program, the Arizona Innovation Challenge, which is an awesome business plan competition for innovation and technology companies. And then we have the Arizona MEP, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which supports small to medium-sized manufacturers throughout the state. Our Arizona Trade Expansion Program for those businesses looking to export their goods and services. In our Arizona at Work, there's some no-cost employment programs to help support employers. And then we have our Small Business Services. We can help you navigate the SBA, Small Business Development Centers, no-cost programs throughout the state, understand the licensing and registration requirements as well. And talking about licensing and registration, we have our small business checklist that helps with that. And it is an online interactive web page that helps entrepreneurs understand the commonly requested licensing, registration, and compliance needs at the local, state, and federal level. You can find a lot of other great in-depth information on where to go and who to contact as you look to grow and expand your business, or if you're just starting, where to go as well. And again, that is on our website. So with that, we want to jump into some small business updates and share a few other events from some of our partners that are out there. Coming up this week, we have the Challenge Her Phoenix, presented by the SBA. And then also started last week, but it is going on throughout this month of September, is the Entrepreneur Speaker Series presented by State 48 Foundation. It's a great series. If you can make that, they do it at the Walter Studios in Phoenix in the evening. And then a new thing that just came to us that has a short window for applications, but it's the 50 women, it's actually 50 women entrepreneurs can change the world program by Take the Lead. There is a small fee if you're accepted into it, but it is an awesome curriculum for helping grow your business and grow yourself as a female entrepreneur. So we're going to post some information on that in the chat as well. I will be on the advisory board as well as a few others that support ACA programs and a bunch of other experts from their industries. It's an amazing advisory team that's helping support that program. So with that, we want to look at our upcoming sessions as well. Next week, we have Navigating Business Loans, Insights from Underwriters. So we are going to have Danny Nee from the Community Investment Corporation on to talk about what the underwriters, what the lenders are looking for as you're preparing or applying for a loan to help grow your business. So you're going to hear it straight from a lender. We're excited about that. And then we have a playbook for ever-changing social media game. We have Jeremy McPeak. Jeremy is an amazing presenter. He's actually the social media expert for the Arizona Super Bowl host committee and manage their social media for that program. So you saw that for the Super Bowl. He's also involved with the Final Four host committee as Phoenix will host the Final Four next spring. So we're excited to have Jeremy with us. I've seen his presentation. That's why I asked him to do it. It's an amazing presentation. Then October 3rd, we have building Facebook ads that work for small businesses. Another great session. So we're looking forward to all these upcoming sessions. We've got an amazing lineup already built out through the end of the year. So join us every Tuesday morning, and hopefully you'll be able to learn something to help advance your business. And so with that, we're going to jump into today's session with Greg Coulter. He's a principal at the Phoenix, Arizona office of Jackson Lewis, and he focuses on employment stuff. And so we've got a great session today. So Greg, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take over and share yours.
All right. How's that?
Not up yet. Let's see. Yep, there we go.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Faith. Appreciate the time today to talk about this topic. I know it's we've got lots of attendees, and that's great. And I think when Robert and I were talking, gosh, it's been 6 months ago about putting this together. We said, well, independent contractors going to be good. We didn't realize probably that, there's going to be some rule changes in various levels that are coming about that may have impact. So it's turned out to be very timely. Just a little bit about Jackson Lewis. We are a employment and labor defense firm only. We represent companies of all sizes in all areas of employment law, wherever it touches, from traditional employment type litigation to immigration law to NLRB union type activities. We do a lot of education and speaking, and because as you probably know and understand that employment law is ever changing and evolving. So there's always something new to talk about or to learn about and try to figure out. The being a small business of any sort, it's extremely difficult because of those laws, depending on how big you are and what state you are in, and whether you're interacting with federal or state agencies or how regulated you are. It's exceedingly difficult to comply with all kinds of regulations and issues. So I commend you guys for continuing to try to learn how to do that and work on that. So questions, please feel free to put up questions and we'll try to get to them. If not, then right at the end, we'll have a question session in which we can try to address those things. As you will see and can imagine, the space of independent contractor issues is evolving and very fact specific, depending on the relationships that you might have with individuals who are doing work for you. A couple areas that we'll talk about in broad categories today. So the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is one of the main reasons that people look at, or companies look at, independent contractor statuses to avoid some of the regulation of an employee, particularly within the space of minimum wage and overtime requirements. State-specific laws that may follow or expand on the Fair Labor Standards issues and how those apply. Each state also, more than others, Arizona not so much, has some independent contractor tests, whether it be from the courts or state statutes, sometimes agency regulations. National Labor Relations Act, which is having some evolving independent contractor definition changes, reverting back to pre-Biden administration or pre-Trump administration analysis and evaluations as to what a employee is. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, and again, reserve some time for some questions. So the employee independent contractor relationship has always been a difficult one, and some industries certainly have lent itself to an independent contractor type of scenario versus employee scenarios, depending on the industries. And those have usually been in areas such as construction, where you're basically an entity who hires other sub entities to take care of discrete, very specific issues or build outs. Not so much in other manufacturing or things like that, but we're dealing with a change in environment, certainly, as the economy changes and the workforce changes and the way people do work changes, and the pandemic accelerated some of those things. So independent contractor has been there, and it's continuing to grow as the change of workforce. One of the primary places you see it is the gig economy. You see the fights all about ride sharing, or the food pickup service, whether they're independent contractors, whether they're employees, and you see those fights going on in a national level. You'll find that for many reasons, state agencies don't like independent contractor status, particularly. I think that's an issue because they miss out on revenue that you would normally pay for an employee. And independent contractor, you don't pay that, so it's up to the independent contractor, who may or may not do that. And quite frankly, the changed workplace, people want to be independent contractors. I think more they see themselves as consultants or entrepreneurs or standalone entities, and they want to be paid and have some more freedom. And it works in some industries and not in others. So there's no single. The problem with all this is you can't go look in the dictionary and find out what a court or agency is going to define that as. So there's no single definition, and it changes across the board. Like I said, we do work across the nation, 61 offices, and each state, each jurisdiction may be different. And also whether you're dealing with federal or you're dealing with state agencies, about how they weigh whether you're an employee or an independent contractor. And whether you're wrong may depend on what the penalties might be, which we'll get into. Like I said, different agencies have different things. The Department of Labor, which administers and oversees the FLSA, the National Labor Relations Board, which investigates and administers the National Labor Relations Act, have different tests and different philosophies about the way they go about doing those things. And if you're using independent contractors, you might have to comply with more than one test. Now, they may be overlapping and have similar content, but they may have difference in numbers or difference in weight for each category or each element that you have. Arizona, so Fair Labor Standards Act is the basic minimum wage, was the minimum wage before. Arizona put one in several years ago, and the overtime requirements for Arizona. So Arizona follows the Fair Labor Standards Act with regard to that. And the Fair Labor Standards Act, is antiquated to say the best. It certainly doesn't reflect our workforce now, and it was really put in place when there was abuse of work rights, where employees maybe not unionized or forced to work 40 hours. So the idea was to decrease the number of work for 40 hours, but if you work more than 40 hours, then you got more money. That was really what was there. But the concepts behind the weight of this, and you'll see, is there certainly are antiquated. If you look at, there's a whole list when it was first passed, there's a whole list of job duties, and typesetter is still there as to what the job duties would be for a typesetter. So we're way beyond that. And application of the Fair Labor Standards to our system is difficult. And probably one of the reasons where you find independent contractors come up is they're trying to, avoid those types of things, whether the contractor wants to be a standalone entity, or the company wants to avoid some of those regulations or requirements as an employee and say, hey, I'll just make you an independent contractor. It certainly isn't that easy. And when I get approached from people saying I have an independent contractor, I look at it very closely, because you probably don't. And it's something that you have to put some consideration into and some evaluation into. And it's frustrating. I was telling Robert, it was frustrating because it's not black and white. It's as you'll see, evaluation of several different elements, and depending on what you're trying to do, those elements and the weight of those elements do vary. So when you come to someone like me or someone else to do evaluation of, are these independent contractors, you usually get a scale of risk. Here's all the things we find, here's how they apply, and that's an analysis of the work they do and the job they do and all the factors. And here's the risk that they aren't, and here's the risk that they are. It's low, medium, and high, just so there's no, the problem is from the first slide is, hey, there's no one definition for this. So as you know, the Fair Labor Standards, like I said, minimum wage for all hours worked, that in Arizona now is $13.85 as of this year, requires employers to pay 1.5 times their employees' regular rate, which is a calculation in and of itself that doesn't always make sense. And it applies on a weekly basis, at least in Arizona. Other states have different issues. But the difference being it only applies to employees, which is one of the things is what we're talking about and what companies run up against. What is an employee? So in order to not be an employee under FLSA, the majority of state laws, workers must satisfy requirements of this independent contractor test. And there are numerous tests, from IRS tests to workers' comp tests to the common law court tests that they find. Generally, here are some of the topics or the criteria for various tests. Again, depending on which agency you're looking at and what you're trying to accomplish, you have to look at the specific test that agency, that court, that state uses. But the various tests, some of the most important factors and the things you look at is degree of control. So who has the actual control? Is it the entity that's receiving the work, the employer, versus the individual who's controlling the work? And there can be lots of things that go into that, including how timing, how it's performed, quality in some cases, unless it's a federal or state or minimum statute type thing, regulation or standard, but who has control over the work, how it's done, whether it's one person, whether it's a team, whether it's done at midnight, whether it's done in the morning. The individual who's claiming a contractor, his opportunity, his or her or entity's opportunity for profit or loss. A lot of times they look at the entrepreneurial spirit. Is this a standalone entity? Do they have the ability to win or make a profit, or are they also on the hook for a loss if it doesn't go well? And some of that looks to what's the entity structure or the individual structure. And sometimes you look at, is this individual's entity its own corporate standalone corporate entity like an LLC or other corporate entity that may help? Individuals' investment in facilities and equipment. This general topic is who's supplying the equipment, and where's the activity happening. Certainly it can be done on site, but whose equipment are they using? Independent contractors or the employers equipment? And is it supplied or purchased or part of the contract? What safety equipment might be required? What tools are required? Or is there a situation where the independent contractor is doing something at their own house, their own facility, their own, shop, and then bring their finished product in that may be used? The permanency of the relationship. If there's too much time that the employer and independent contractor have been working together over, 5 years, doing the same thing, kind of going along, the permanency of the relationship actually does not weigh in favor of independent contractor status. So a lot of times it's good to change your independent contractors and not become too set in them. And that the problem with that is, if you get a good independent contractor that's doing the work you need, you want to keep them. You don't want to retrain someone to do that. But it does weigh against the finding of a independent contractor relationship. The skill or expertise required by the individual. Is this individual just putting widgets together or doing, cut and pasting, doing very basic things, or is there real skill and expertise involved by the independent contractor in doing something? So if there's skill and expertise, very specific to the individual, that weighs in favor of independent contractor status. And then whether the work is part of an integrated unit of production, meaning, is this the employer just outsourcing what other employees do? Is it something unique, or is it just, I needed someone to do these things and you outsourced it? It's really something I do in-house. I have I have employees standing next to independent contractors doing the exact same thing. Then that work is probably very integrated into the unit of production of the entity, and that weighs against independent contractor status. We mentioned before, so the Department of Labor oversees the FLSA. The Department of Labor in 2021 emphasized control over work and opportunity for profit or loss carried the greatest weight, and did away with some of these factors, didn't do away with them, but didn't emphasize them very much. And this actually, we believe, probably helped employers who want to use independent contractors, having those as a greater weight. And why does all this matter? The different, particularly the FLSA and wages, those types of withholdings are things that independent contractor status is more attractive, both sometimes to the employer and to the contractor themselves. But if you make a mistake, it's called misclassification. And so if the independent contractor is found to be by agency or court or other ways of being actually an employee, then the employer becomes liable and can become liable for significant amount of damages and issues, including the unpaid overtime. So if you have an independent contractor, they're probably not keeping hours of work, depending on what your relationship with them. So you don't know that in a court or agency says, no, that's actually an employee. You don't have the ability to go back to time records and establish how long they worked on for what period of time. So there's possibility of significant, and the statute of limitations is 2 years, but intentional activity, intentionally misclassification is 3 years. So you could have to go back for not maybe one independent contractor, but several, to calculate unpaid overtime over that period of time and be liable for it. Plaintiffs' attorneys get fees in this type of litigation. If you're in a state, and Arizona is not one of them, where you have required meal and rest periods, I can tell you California is, and it's its own area of litigation. It is sustaining a whole group of attorneys and court dockets litigating over unpaid meal and rest periods. Penalties under each state may have its own, but under the FLSA, you can have liquidated damages, which will double your unpaid overtime or your other penalties. You may have withholding problems from agencies, including back taxes. And you may have owed under your policy employee benefits that weren't paid that you would have to pay. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things you can do. I can tell you more than once, despite someone saying and working for years that they were an independent contractor, the incentives can be so great that even that close relationship, when they see what kind of money they could have been paid, or maybe their relationship went south, all of a sudden they claim to be employees and not independent contractors. One of the issues with this is certainly a target area for class actions. Arizona is not huge about that yet, but we are getting more and more FLSA class actions where the allegations are very simple. If you have one employee or one independent contractor and the allegation is an independent, he's an employee, they simply tap into every similar person there is. And then it's up to the employer to, as defending themselves, to attack that. And it's costly. Courts have varied a little bit about what information you have to give up, but if there's a tentative, presumptive class action set, you may have to give up, your records as to other employees, which only if you've made a mistake as to one, you've made it to the others. And all it does is add to the calculation of damages. Another issue is there's personal liability for owners and decision makers. So even though you're a corporate entity, if you're an individual making those decisions under FLSA, and there can be personal liability for you. So it can be very difficult. Just generally, the FLSA is always getting changed in different interpretation. As you know, there's overtime that's required for employees that are not exempt and not overtime employees that are exempt. So you may have a situation where you could argue that the independent contractor, even though an employee wasn't owed overtime, you still have minimum wage calculations, which more than likely you're not going to have a problem with. There are, even though someone's exempt, you really can't change and withhold things from that employee's salary. So it's another danger if someone's found to be an employee and there was some sort of offset done to them. Let's see, we're probably aiming for more people who are entitled to overtime, as the 684 weekly salary is likely to change in October. There's a rule. They're working on that to increase that amount, and the effect of that will be you'll have more employees, whatever that is, who are entitled to overtime. So the Department of Labor has also, that's in charge of FLSA, has done a notice that their system in which they make rules is called a notice of proposed rulemaking. Back in October, and to revise the standard of whether an employee is an independent contractor for purposes of the FLSA. It mirrors pre-Trump administration classifications, and what it's going to do is change to go back to the previous consideration of all 6 factors that I previously mentioned, give equal weight to those, with some slight variation in depending on the industry or what's happened, but you weigh all 6 of those equally now if this rule comes into existence. And we believe that'll probably end up in a finding that more supposed independent contractors under the Trump administration rule are now going to be employees for FLSA purposes under this new Biden administration rule. Here's the 6 factors that they're looking at. Again, the degree of control exercise, the worker's skill and initiative, the relationship permanency, opportunity for profit loss, which was a big issue with them before that they were focusing on, workers' investment in equipment, and integral part of the employer's business. The new rule will have you consider, will have us considering all of these equally as opposed to emphasizing the entrepreneurial spirit and encouraging that. So we anticipate this is same slide as just what I said. It's not an exhaustive list, and you can see a lot of these tests kind of overlap, and the words are kind of the same, and what they're saying same. And each court and agency gives those words a little bit different meaning sometimes. We anticipate by October of 2023 we'll see this rule, and it'll come out, and again may impact whether or not you have, for FLSA purposes or any real federal purposes other than maybe the IRS, whether there's an independent contractor versus an employee that you have. Yeah. So state laws can supplement, and depending on the state, there may be significant supplement, such as California, or very little supplement, such as Arizona. So FLSA is pretty general, pretty standard, but various state laws can do different things, just like Arizona, create a higher minimum wage, require overtime throughout the day, like California does. So if you have, California believes if you have someone working in California, you have a California employee. Many states believe that. If you have someone working in Colorado, Colorado may believe you have a Colorado employee, at which point you need to abide by Colorado law or California law. And California is, you measure overtime by day. Over 8 hours can get you overtime as well, not just 40 in a week. Mandated meal and rest breaks in California, certainly. Again, if you have one employee over there, you think they're an independent contractor. California may think they're a employee, and they'll look at whether or not you provided meal and rest breaks. Private rights of action, depending on the state, to enforce. Not every state has those. There are private rights in Arizona, and broadened definitions of employees. So I think I mentioned before, particularly with regard to the gig economy, there's ongoing cases and legislation in California and other states, but it seems we kind of follow California. If it's not 5 years, it's 10 years, that is attacking the gig economy and changing the way we define independent contractor and employees. So if you're operating in another state or have someone who's even working remotely in another state, you should probably take a look at what that state's laws are with regard to independent contractor, and then all the things to require of employees for employees, so you know what the risks are. Arizona in specific, there's no statutory definition, where we kind of like so much of Arizona, we don't have a lot of published cases. We don't have a lot of statutes, which sometimes can be good. Allowing employers to kind of do what they want, although you got to follow what the cases do and say. Courts have established, for overall purposes, a general right to control test, which looks at who exercises control over the results or the means to achieve the results. Really looking at the realities of what this relationship is. And you'll see that these elements are very similar in some respects, although language is a little bit different sometimes. Extent of control over work, degree of supervision, who controls how the work's done, when it's done. Do you have a supervisor who's telling this independent contractor what to do, or supervising the way things are finished or completed? the distinct nature of the worker's business, which gets in a little bit of what is this independent contractor doing? What's their business? Is it a standalone? Are they only working for the employer, or do they have the ability to work for other companies? Do they, as all the way down to, you know, the next one is specialization. How specialized are they doing? Are they doing something that only they can do that you don't have other employees to do, so they can sell it more as an entrepreneur? And you seek them out to do that. Who provides the materials and place of work? Place of work is all can be difficult because sometimes it's required to be done at your place, and you happen to have the materials there. So this can be one that is difficult to overcome, but again, one of many factors. Duration of employment. How you use the same independent contractor every year for 10 years. That person may not be an independent contractor, may not be going to look at other work or do other work for other entities. You really want to focus on what's the relationship and what rights, what ability do these independent contractors have to govern their own business, all the way down to, do they have their own website? Do they have their own business cards? Are they a corporate entity? You know, how, you know, you'll see the next one, method of payment. How are they paid? It's a big one. Are you paying your independent contractors by the hour or by the project? By the hour seems to indicate they're an employee. By the project, in which they risk profit and loss, and they control how the work is done, mitigate is more of an independent contractor status and ways for independent contractor finding. Relationship of work done to regular business of the employer. Again, are they side by side with your employee doing the same type of thing? Is what they're doing something that is integral to what your business does or produces? They may be an employee. And finally, which for this is a little unique, because in general, I'd say that across the country that most places don't care what the parties believe, because most agencies believe that employees or independent contractors are being taken advantage of. So they don't care what the parties believe. It's an unequal relationship. But in Arizona, concept-wise, they will take into account what parties believe, but more specifically, what parties have outlined that they want to do. And that is, Arizona allows employers to establish the existence of an independent contractor relationship by having contractors sign a declaration of independent status. And it creates a rebuttable presumption that this is an independent contractor relationship. And by rebuttable, it means just on its face, something happens, you go to defend yourself before an agency, say, oh no, this is an independent contractor, not an employee. Here's our declaration of independent status. That agency is going to go, okay, well, that's great, but what's actually happening? That can say whatever it says, but if you're doing something that's contrary to that, similar to your business entities, probably everybody's heard of piercing the corporate veil. If you got a business entity, but you don't act like a business entity, you act like a sole proprietorship, then that presumption is rebutted. The declaration is optional. It's not necessary. It can, in certain situations, be helpful, not only in outlining what you expect of the independent contractor and laying down the pieces of that relationship and how it's governed. I think it would certainly dissuade both agencies and plaintiffs' attorneys if they had to fight against that. So any independent contractor type agreement, but certainly this declaration, which under the statute, which is ARS 23-1601, has model language criteria that you can use and may be helpful in always trying to defend yourself and outline the obligations of the independent contractor. Here's some of the pieces of that declaration. Acknowledgement by the contracting parties that the parties can perform services for others. pardon me, expectation the contractor provides services for other parties. And it tries to counter those very specific elements of criteria, performance, method, process, those types of things. Also can outline, and very important probably for the relationship regardless, is how they're paid, salary, hourly, how it's covered, how their employees as an independent contractor are covered or not covered. It can be very helpful for workers' comp claims if you have an independent contractor and they're bringing someone on in addition to the individual, and they're working and they get injured on your property or doing work for you. How does workers' comp treat that? Arizona also has its only industry specific independent contractor is qualified market contractor, which is geared towards gig economy. It's pretty unique as to states. I think more states are doing it, except for the ones that are actively trying to destroy this industry. So you enter into agreement where a marketplace platform is used, like a digital platform, to provide services to third parties, where they book through the digital services, not through any other means, and other criteria, but you can have a qualified market contractor and an independent contractor relationship if you have a company that's doing those types of things. And then, that's any of the ride service type places. I know that some of things like Angie's List are doing things like that, more and more app-based platform type things. Think about doing that. Just want to throw more California at you. It uses the ABC test, which is much more difficult to prove that it is the employer's burden by clear and convincing standards to show that the individual is an independent contractor versus employee, and it's much more difficult in California to do. It will probably get more difficult. So the National Labor Relations Act is also having the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, oversees and implements the National Labor Relations Act. And most people, most companies think, well, that's only applies to union issues. The way it's written, the NLRA applies to workplaces that are non-union. And the the NLRA and various offices, including the one that oversees Phoenix, are getting more and more aggressive, wanting to see things like handbooks, even if there's no union involved, handbooks, agreements, because of the things that they believe that are in the statute they are to protect, regardless of whether you are a union or not. And one of those things they're looking at is also independent contractor status, because if you're an independent contractor, the NLRA does not apply. So they're looking at changing that or narrowing that definition to make it more applicable and find more employees versus independent contractors. So as a result, true independent contractors, like I said, they can't organize. It doesn't apply to them. They can't participate in elections. They can't file fair labor practice charges. They can't bargain. So they're exempt from that. And the NLRA and the local offices are trying to really dig around and be involved in workplaces that are non-traditional. Here's historically the NLRB applied a common law agency test that had 10 considerations you've seen before. In general application, and it wasn't always a issue. It was pretty clear. Partially, I think, because a lot of times they were in workplaces that were actually you would think is traditional union, such as manufacturing or even construction. So traditionally, all factors must be assessed and weighed, no factor is decisive, and other things may be considered. Over time, the NLRB again created a emphasis towards the entrepreneurial opportunity, which helped in this situation for employers to say that it was independent contractors. In June 2023, the NLRB returned to its earlier broader standard requiring that all of those factors in the working relationship be assessed, and no one factor is dispositive of the issue. While they may still consider entrepreneurial opportunity, it's not the driving factor. And again, in our belief and analysis, this is going to end up with finding that there are more employees versus independent contractors, and is another example of trying to attack this independent contractor, which really is, in some cases, the new work environment, trying to attack that status. So why does it matter if you're not a union? Like I said, the NLRB can go in and force the NLRA in non-union. So if these individuals are not independent contractors and employees, they're covered by the NLRA, and they have Section 7 rights, which means they're protected in concerted activities and have a right to unionize. So we know what unionization is. The concerted activities is basically employees talking to one another, even in a situation where you would otherwise consider insubordinate to their supervisors, if that insubordination is an attempt by the independent contractor employee to change workplace rules or activities that benefits the rest of the workplace. That's considered concerted activity and a highlight of what the NLRA is coming after. Let me take any questions we have. We have a little bit of time left and see what I can.
All right, we have a few questions here in the Q&A. First one says, can you draw a distinction between agency staff versus independent contractor on semi-permanent basis?
So the way I understand it, agency staff would be the employing entity of the independent contractor, and you're saying semi-permanent basis. I think that goes to one of the factors that you would have to analyze is to what is the length and permanency of the relationship. So if it's, and I've seen companies do this, they go 2 years within one independent contractor and then they take a year off. They go another 2 years and they take a year off. So it's not permanent and it evolves and it changes, whether it's every 6 months or whether it's every year or 2 years. It's at least one of those measures as to one of the factors to say this isn't a permanent relationship. And this independent contractor doesn't rely on me, the employer, solely for its business income. Because if they're relying on me solely for their business income, that weighs against their independence and their ability to do work for other companies.
Excellent. We got another really interesting one here. It says, at some point, can you explain the right to work that some voice as an Arizona employment law, and how do the contractor versus employee rules apply?
Yeah. So again, these are concepts that get a little bit mixed up. The concept of right to work is in Arizona, you have the right to work even if there's a union. You don't have to join unions. We don't have union shops and things like that. So that's right to work. At will is the bigger concept that says an employee can terminate or be terminated for any reason at all, as long as it's not discriminatory or illegal. And then you're dealing with a situation where neither one of those really apply to a true contractor relationship, because a true contract relationship should be contractual. I contract with you for X, Y, and Z. You provide it, I can terminate it with 30 days notice, or, without notice, or whatever else. And it's more of a true contractual subcontractor type relationship. And then an employee is, a W-2 employee who all those things apply to. If you have a union, right to work applies to, but at will applies to as well. Hope that answered it.
Excellent. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. It says, are there specific instances when an employer can employ an independent contractor versus a full-time permanent employee? And what are those conditions that an individual can be employed as an independent contractor?
Yeah, those conditions, you got to weigh it against the elements that we talked about. So if you've hypothetically, if you've got an employee or more than one employee that are doing a specific job, and instead you want an independent contractor to do that specific job, whether it's, creating digital information or building widgets. You have to look at the elements and set up your relationship with the independent contractor so it abides by those elements. You can't have them as your traditional employee and just say they're an independent contractor. And I see that happening. So if you want them to be an independent contractor, then they need those elements. They need to have something, probably their own entity, be able to control the way they do the work, maybe use their own equipment. Better not to pay them by hour, better to pay them by project, better to let them work when they want to work, let them not be directly supervised by you, because it's a gray line. Robert and I talked about it. It's this gray patch. Are you an employee? Clear over here, they come to work and punch a clock. Not so clear over here, particularly in our virtual workforce now. There's lots of people doing stuff from wherever. Are they an independent contractor or an employee? You really have to sit down, look at job descriptions, even have interviews with the way they're doing their job, and do an audit and come up with, what are the risks? Is this position as it's done now high risk or low risk? Are you doing everything you can to make it an independent contractor versus an employee, or do you need to change things? So you need to evaluate those things. There's certainly going to be situations in which it's clear, hey, that's an independent contractor, very specific, skilled job. They can do it on their own. They can do it at night. I'm just going to pay them when they invoice me. I mean, those things are easier. They fall into independent contractor. But when you put them side by side with an employee and you're treating them more like an employee, you may run into problems.
Excellent. This one ties in with the contractor stuff. This next one that says, I have a question regarding the permanency of the relationship between the parties. Some of my contractors have done work for me for many years. However, this is an on and off relationship. I might not have anything for them for 6 months. Also, they work for other entities at the same time. Does that still count as a long-term relationship?
Yeah, I think that in that situation, if we were to hypothetically apply that to the elements here, that while it's a long-term knowledge, relationship, it's not a long-term work relationship because of the way it's being handled. I have a specific need. I hire this person who has a specific skill to do this specific job. That person or that entity is a standalone company. They invoice me, and like you said, very good point. They do work for other entities. You don't discourage that, and even the little things of, are they marketing themselves to other companies? Do they have business cards? Even though antiquated, no one has business cards anymore, hardly. But the website, do they invoice you on their invoices? I think all those facts, as you do, lean more towards on that factor that it's not a permanent relationship. It's an ongoing, evolving, relationship as needed. But when we talk about permanency of relationship, we're really talking about a situation in which someone's on they get a statement of work on an independent contractor agreement. It renews every year, and it's renewed every year for 10 years. And you come to find out that the contractor doesn't do any work for any other company. That's where you're going to run into issues, because that's basically an independent contractor who's relying upon you for all of their income. That's what you want to avoid.
All right, we are almost out of time, and there we got a number of questions we won't get to, so I'm trying to scroll through and see. Oh, here's a good question. It says, are there additional considerations for professionals, for example, doctors, dentists, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you may be applying the same consideration, but you can imagine that the skill and expertise factor is very highlighted. So you do find more agency contractor type relationships between providers and hospitals and providers and medical groups, if they're not true partners or whatever it is. But usually that's such a high level, they're providing such a high level service that you've got a very detailed agreement that either meets all the qualifications or makes it clear this is a contractor relationship. And those are pretty sound and stand up if done right.
Okay. And then we've got one last one I want to ask before we wrap up time. This one's interesting. It says, would we be liable for a subcontractor's use of independent contractors? For example, if we issue an actual contract to a business entity, the subcontract who then uses 1099 workers.
Mm-hmm. Most likely, I can't say for sure, but most likely not. It would probably depend on what you want your relationship with your independent contractor to be clear, and have that your relationship with them. So if they are a true independent contractor and stand alone, then they should be assuming all and be liable for their own issues with paying those contractors. It can certainly get messy if you're fronting money or you're paying the invoices from their subcontractor directly. But really, if you have that concern, you need to address it with your contractor. And if you address that and create a true independent contractor relationship and abide by that, you certainly are lessening your liability.
Excellent. We are at time. Greg, do you have a slide with your contact information on it by chance? So if there's anybody else wants to get a hold of you, they can. Or if you want to drop that in the chat, kind of at the very beginning.
Go back to it. Right down here.
Yep. So we'll leave that up here for a second. So if anybody needs to reach out and they want to contact Greg and just ask you more questions related to the topic. But we appreciate you being on and sharing this. There's a lot of information, a lot of confusion oftentimes with independent contractors and employees. So thank you for helping clarify that some. And as always, it's clear as mud now. But there's also one reason why we generally recommend that for every business you have a team, and a person on that team is your accountant, your legal advisor, and usually your tax advisor is part of that team. So if you have employees, you saw that the consequences of doing it wrong can be a lot more costly than reaching out to a professional to give some guidance.
Yeah.
So, Greg, any last comments before we wrap up?
Just to highlight that, I mean, there isn't, it is that gray, kind of, it's clear as mud issue, but at least think about it, right? I mean, put some thought into it, use your team. And if you're using independent contractors, what do we need to do? I know it's not a profit center. It's not, necessarily making you any money, but a little bit of work on the front end probably save you a lot on the end.
Excellent. Thank you, and we appreciate everybody being here with us today, and we hope you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday for our next boot camp. So until then, have a good week and a great Tuesday, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.